Good afternoon. Welcome to the Library of Virginia. I'm delighted for you to join us. And my name is Catherine Fitzgerald Wyatt. I'm the Education and Outreach Manager here at the library. And we are welcoming back an old friend and a new friend, Jody Lynn Allen and Phyllis Slade Martin. And they are going to be in conversation this afternoon discussing Jody's new book, Roses in December, Black Life in Hanover County from Civil War to Civil Rights, the inspiring chronicle of a Black community in Virginia fighting for civil rights over the course of a pivotal century. The book is available for purchase in our Virginia shop, and Jody is going to do the signing after the program. Dr. Jody Lynn Allen is an associate professor of history and the founding director of the Lemon Project, a journey of reconciliation at the College of William and Mary. Her research interests cover the U.S. Civil War through the long civil rights movement, focusing on Black agency. Jody is the author and co-author of several scholarly essays and the author of Roses in December, which you're going to hear about today. Dr. Phyllis Slade Martin holds a PhD in history from George Mason University. She owns Slade & Associates, LLC, a research, education, and organizational consulting business. Before becoming a small business owner, she served as the director of the African American Studies Research and Resource Center and the associate director of the program at George Mason University. Before I hand it over to Jody and Phyllis, I would like to share a few upcoming events with you. On Saturday, October 25th, the library is hosting a free all-day symposium exploring the themes of our current exhibition, House to Highway, Reclaiming a Community History. I encourage you to walk through if you have some time after the program. On Tuesday, October 28th, the library will welcome Michael Twitty, who will be discussing his new book, Recipes from the American South, in conversation with culinary historian Lenny Sorensen. And please check our calendar of events online for more details on these and other upcoming programs at the library. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Jody and Phyllis. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. Didn't know what, if the having to cancel initially, what impact that might have, but I've never been a part of something that caused parking to be such a problem here. So, and I will tell you that I wrote my dissertation here, and Roses in December, which comes out of my dissertation, I wrote that here too. And the research, of course, most of the research took place here. So this is a home away from home for me. I used to try and get the librarians upstairs to let me hide in a corner. I promised that I wouldn't, hurt anything. I just wanted to stay. But so this is a really special place to me. I want to take, as you know, we originally were going to be doing this in May, and I had to cancel. And I feel moved to make kind of a public service announcement because I am blessed to be here. And I found out with no prior news or information that I needed cardiac bypass surgery. I found that out in May and had this surgery in June. And I'm not going to go into details, but what I want to tell you, if you're a person, or you know of people who put off appointments, when doctors are telling you, you need to do this, you need to do that, and I kept rescheduling because I thought they were overreacting. And so I had other things I needed to do. And finally, actually, it was a colleague like me who is not a medical doctor, but she said to me after a faculty meeting one day, I stood up and I got really dizzy, and she noticed. And she said, you know, you should get that checked out. Sometimes that means blockage somewhere. And so for whatever reason, she scared me like my doctors didn't. And so I didn't cancel the next appointment. I kept it. And that's when they found out. And so, you know, it's just, if you have good doctors, listen to them. And so again, I'm not preaching. I'm just saying I wanted to make this public service announcement because it's you just never know, you know. And I would have told people, that's not even in my family, right? But a friend of mine who's helping me do some family research found that I have 2 relatives who had heart conditions, and that are listed on their death certificates. So while I didn't know those 2 women, I do have it in my family. And so anyway, so I just wanted to say that, and again, listen, and don't necessarily listen, because my husband's always telling me, you have a PhD, not an MD. But you know, sometimes I get it right. But anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and talk about roses, which I shorten it for. That's my loving little nickname for it. But I'm excited to share some things with you, and to hear your questions and thoughts about it. So I'll turn it over to Phyllis.
Well, Jody, Dr. Allen, we are glad you're here with us, and we appreciate and value you sharing that story. So thank you very much. I was going to ask if you would read, I think you have a short segment that you might read as our opening.
This is part of the preface. It was November 8th, 2005, Election Day. The weather was beautiful, and there was a steady turnout of people voting in Virginia's most hotly contested gubernatorial campaign since 1989, when L. Douglas Wilder became the first elected African-American governor in the United States. It was late morning in Ashland, the only incorporated town in Hanover County, Virginia, and I observed a black man in his late 70s or early 80s leaning on his cane as he exited the public library where he had just cast his ballot. As he approached a campaign volunteer distributing information for the Democratic Party candidates, he proudly pointed to the sticker on his jacket that read, "I voted." The white campaign worker, who appeared to be his contemporary, beamed back at him and said, "You're a good boy." The man's steps hesitated, and his already slow forward movement slowed even more. While he never stopped smiling, he remarked, almost to himself, that he was just remembering the old days when people used to call men boys. The campaign volunteer, noticeably embarrassed, hastily explained that she had not meant to be offensive. The man replied, "I know, I was just remembering," and he continued on his way. The volunteer's immediate response and red face indicated that she too remembered, at least when events jogged her recollection. The woman's turn of phrase carried the man back to a time when his manhood was questioned by virtually the entire nation, especially white Southerners. He remembered when legalized segregation and overt racism severely restricted the lives of African Americans. He probably never heard black adults referred to or addressed as Mr. or Mrs. outside of his community. It was a time when most African Americans were not allowed to vote in elections, when public schools for black children, while prized by the communities they served, were substandard and lacked basic equipment. On the other hand, like his contemporaries interviewed for this book, the old man might have also remembered black and white farmers sharing tools and other equipment, and black and white children playing together at least before the first grade. He was remembering the early 20th century when a white employer could weep at the funeral of a black woman who had worked for them or raised them, but would decline an invitation to join the family at her home after leaving the cemetery. It was a complex time. It is chiefly the period of this man's earlier memories, the Jim Crow era, or what I refer to here as the era of disfranchisement, that this book explores. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And first, I want to congratulate you on Roses in December, the publication of Roses in December. As in that example, you vividly capture the life and times of Black people in Hanover County post-Civil War to the Civil Rights period. I grew up in the big town of Hampton, Virginia, and next to the big town of Newport News, Virginia. And I never thought I would be so captivated by life in Hanover County, Virginia. So congratulations on that. As I think this story illustrates in your opening, can you talk a bit about your choice of the title Roses in December as Black Hanoverians moved forward in their lives in positive ways, finding joy despite living in the midst of inequalities for civil rights? They lived in an undemocratic society. Can you talk a little bit about that connection?
Sure. I went to an event, a Black History Month event, in the Ashland Public Library, and I was still searching for a title for the dissertation. I wasn't finished yet, but I wanted to have the title. And there was a panel of two men and two women, as I recall, who were talking about growing up in Ashland. And one person on the panel, Mrs. Watkins, said she talked about not having books for school. Did I say the wrong name? Williams. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm so glad to see you. Okay. So thank you for coming. She was talking about not having books for school, and her friend did have some books. So what she would do is she would borrow her friend's books, copy out the assignment, and then take them back to her friend. And she had to do that every time there was homework. And she said, in talking about school and getting an education, she said while it was difficult, it was worth it. It was something that she was encouraged to do, regardless of the challenges. And she said that her mother had a saying that when you had good times, you had to remember those, because then when things were bad, you would always still be able to have Roses in December. And so I immediately wrote that's the title, because that's what I was finding, that people, regardless of what they were dealing with on a day-to-day basis, they were figuring out how to have their roses in December. They were still living their lives. They were still happy. And they dealt with the challenges. And so that's where that comes from. I will tell you, though, there are a lot of books called Roses in December. And my editor and I, because at first I thought I had to kind of talk them into letting me keep it for the book. And finally, they were convinced, but I had no idea. And one of them was kind of funny. My cousin looked it up, and she just put in Roses in December, and it had nothing to do with my book. But that's okay, because that still it's still the best title I could have had. But it's just kind of interesting to find that out in hindsight. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. You weave such a vivid picture. You give us such a beautiful picture of life in Hanover County, and you connect it so well with significant historic moments. In many ways, you take what we consider ordinary, and you tell this extraordinary story. Can you talk a bit about your process or the sources that you use to weave this full story?
Sure. You know, there wasn't a lot of Black history written in Hanover County. There's a book, a very good book of oral histories that the Hanover County Black Heritage Society did several years ago. But there was no kind of full treatment of the county. And actually, when I told a lot of the folks at church, I was going to study Hanover County, and their response was, "You're not going to find anything here," you know. But what I found was that there was a lot, you know, but it had been lost, or just not, really, talked about it extensively. And so I started just going through, I read about 100 years worth of newspapers, just looking for bits and pieces of where to start. And that's kind of where I started. I found, stories about, church events. There was off and on over the years, there was a separate column in the Herald Progress that talked about, it had different names, but sometimes it was of interest to our colored readers or something like that. And so, but you would find out, what things were happening at the different churches or at the schools or what have you. And so I started there. And then I went to Randolph-Macon to see what kind of things they might have. And at that time, there really wasn't a whole lot. But they were getting ready to renovate one of the buildings, and they had just brought out boxes and boxes of papers or whatever, it was the president's papers. And they hadn't been processed. And if anybody in here is a archivist, generally, you don't let people start going through boxes before they've been processed. But they let me go through this box. And I'm just looking to see, and I come across a letter from George Washington Carver thanking Randolph-Macon for the invitation to come and how well he was treated. And I'm like, oh my God, George, And so I didn't find anything much else about it for maybe a few months, and then I found where there was a note, there had been a small notice in the newspaper about him having been on campus. And then maybe 5 years later, I interviewed Ms. Dorothy Jones, who was in her 90s at the time, but she had grown up in Ashland, and she was great. Her memories were clear, but at the end, I don't even know exactly how it came up. It was just meant to be. She mentioned being in the audience. It was her high school chemistry class was invited to Randolph-Macon to see and hear George Washington Carver. And so but she was white. And she said, unfortunately, Black people were not allowed to come, And so I want to find out, I haven't traveled yet to go through his papers, but I'm hoping at some point that I'll be able to travel and see what he might have had to say, and that might be an article, because I'm not finished with Hanover County. It's just too many things. There are too many too many events, too many people with great stories. And so I'm hoping that there will be some articles that will come out and maybe finish or at least add on to some of the stories in here. But so I don't know.
That's good. And
okay.
I think
because I'll just start talking and answering 15 other questions.
Well, this is great. This is great. As you were talking about stories, as I was going through and highlighting a couple stories that we might talk about, I ended up making all of these notes, and I'm like, well, we have 1 hour, and there are about 20 stories I would like to hear more about. And so, yes, your next project is forthcoming. As you talk about stories, let me say this. As a historian, one of the great joys is going to the archives and being given an opportunity to go through unprocessed papers. It is very exciting. Y'all don't seem as excited as I am. It really is, like, really exciting. Okay, so was there a particular story that you were most intrigued by, and why?
I think William Henry Winston. I will back up and say I had gotten the name of a teacher who was one of the first black people to integrate the schools as a teacher in the county. And so I contacted her and I asked if she would do an interview, and she said yes, and she wanted to come to my house. So I said, sure. Well, when I opened the door, there was, she was there, her husband was there, and another couple was there. And I thought, okay, this is good. And so we started talking, and I was asking her, about the experience of integrating the school. And I don't remember how it came up, but her husband said that his and I need to go back and listen, it's either great or three greats. Grandfather had served in the Union Army, and he believed he had received some sort of pension because he bought land in the county. And so, and he kept talking about and so this was really piquing my interest. And as to what his story was, because he had been, well, I won't get ahead yet, but and so of course I got her story. I got another great story from the wife and the other couple, and so you never know. You open that door, you let everybody in, And so he mentioned this pension, and so he thought his grandfather had a pension. And so I went to the National Archives in DC, and I started looking through, because then everything was still on microfilm. And if you haven't done that, you should. Anyway, microfilm is such a joy. But there, I kept going through, the records of Hanover and the names of people from Hanover, and I couldn't find it. I was like, oh, man. And so finally, I knew his wife's, he married a woman named Agnes. And so as I was glancing, I saw Agnes. And what had happened was his name was William Henry Winston, but they had initially marked him down in the record as William Henry Weston. And so I figured maybe this northerner was checking him in, and he said Winston with a southern accent, and it came out Weston on the paper, because the rest of the record he's referred to as Winston. And so anyway, he did serve. He was injured twice, And because of that, he did receive a pension, but also because of that, investigators went to talk to all the people that had lived around him, and because they wanted to make sure that folks hadn't had these injuries before the war. And so I have great stories and great information about him. And so he was 15 years old when the Union Army came through, and he walked off with them and ended up, joining the Army. And so he was mustered out in Brazos, Texas, and he walked from Texas back to Hanover County. There's no description of how long it took, but that's how he got home. And then he buys land, he does well, he becomes a deacon in his church. He also participates in other things I see in the newspaper that he's doing. And so that was just, it's not necessarily a unique story, but it was just a fascinating story to me. And I cannot tell you what a thrill it was to be able to take everything I found back to his great grandson and hand him, and he teared up, I teared, I do, I'm a historian who cries. I'm not a tough one, apparently, but he was so, glad to have that. And Mr. Morris is no longer with us, but I'm so glad that he knew, and hopefully his family, his descendants knew who they came from. And so that's one of my favorites, but there are many. But like you said, we only have an hour, so.
Thank you for sharing that. And I did want to mention, toward the end, we'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So you start thinking about questions that you might have to ask. I want to talk a bit about the notion of place regarding role expectations of Blacks by the white community members, and how Black Hanoverians responded to efforts to restrict their civil rights. I happen to love the story of Robert Grimes. You don't have to tell it, but I think that's a great illustration. But often we think about, I remember growing up and adults saying, stay in your place, know your place, do this, do that. And so as we see this play out between adults and the fight for civil rights, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, there certainly was an attempt to keep Black people in their place, right? There wasn't a real push at all to reestablish slavery, but while slavery was over, white supremacy was not. And so there was an interest in maintaining that. And so you had a place, whether your place was, your neighborhood or your job, whether you might have been a housekeeper, a cook, a nanny, or what have you. If you were male, you were doing hard labor, or you were farming, which I think is hard labor too. And so there were I guess certain expectations, and if you tried to step out of that place, then there was a problem. And so, and as you mentioned, the story from Robert Grimes, who was a 16 or 17-year-old working in the local drugstore. And I met him in his 70s, and he was still feisty. He was not going to, he was definitely going to be someone who was going to challenge this so-called place that he was supposed to be in. And he was working at this store, and there was a young white girl working there. They were the same age, but of course they did not go to school together, but they would sometimes come to work early, and they would study together. And at some point, when she was about to turn 17, I believe, the owner, there was a family that owned the store, and the mother pulled him to the side and said, she's about to turn 17, and you need to call her Miss now, and use her last name. And he told her, I will call her Miss, her last name was, no, I forget her last name, actually. I don't think I even knew that. That's not in the book. I was going to say the name of the owners. But you call her Miss, and he says, well, I will call her Miss when she calls me Mr. Grimes. And so the woman was very upset, and she says, well, I'm going to tell my husband. And he says, fine, do what you need to do. And thinking he left, thinking he no longer had a job. But when he did, and I'm not clear, actually, let me just tell you, you can forget what you write, okay? But I don't remember the exact detail about how he comes back, but anyway, Mr. Flowers never said to him, you need to call her Miss So-and-so. And what I say in the book is, either, Mr. Flowers was more open-minded, or he had a good worker and didn't want to lose him. But either way, Mr. Grimes stood up for himself and succeeded. And you see those kinds of things throughout in the county. It's not, it's not a big sign. It's not, threatening. It's just, this is the way I'm going to treat myself, and I'm going to make you treat me the same way. And so there were places, but you could resist those places without, a big to-do, I guess I should say.
That's, I think, a great segue and illustration of this description you give about describing acts of resistance in Hanover as a slow and steady hammer, striking slow and steady blows against injustices meted out against their civil rights. Did you want to say anything else about that in terms of, I think that example that you just gave really fit this idea of taking those, what might be considered small steps, but really significant.
Yeah, I think, in Hanover, which happened in a lot of communities, Black people came together, they raised money to repair the school, or to, if they wanted, typically it would be 7 or 8, Black children would get maybe school 7 or 8 months, and white children would get they would have a longer school year. And so sometimes what would happen is the Black families would raise money, they would have events, and then they could have they could pay the teacher for an extra month. And so they did that kind of thing. There was, for the Black school, they wanted they didn't have a cafeteria, and they wanted a basement. They thought that, and so you see at different times in the paper about these fundraisers for the basement of the training school. And so you see them, because even again, this resistance to place, you also see, and then they showed up at the school board meetings. You see it in the minutes. They didn't necessarily always get what they wanted, but they showed up there, and they would keep showing up until most of the times they eventually got it. They didn't have a high school, in the county for blacks until 1950, but that was a lot of pushing and talking and just the demanding, in some ways at these meetings, that our children need, because you had the training school, but you didn't get a diploma, you got a certificate. And so that was different in terms of whether college or jobs or what have you. You didn't have the same kinds of papers, so to speak, that you would need to do certain things. And so it was a kind of a constant, like I said, just kind of chipping away. They never gave up. And sometimes there were people, I would see letters or what have you, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe they wrote that. They were very professional letters, but they were saying what they wanted, They organized to raise money or to build what have you, or so it was a constant, just like I said, either chipping away at this system. So yeah, there's lots of stories, I think, in there. Yeah.
You talk a good amount, and a number of the illustrations are centered in the church, and the Black church in particular. And there's a focus not only on the spirituality or religion, also we see organizing, healthcare, education, employment. Can you talk just a bit about the role of the Black churches in Hanover?
Well, the Black church was really the only thing that the only institution that Black people controlled. And so it was everything. Immediately after the war, quite often, the Black church was also the school. It was, but it was, over the years, that would change, but it was civic, it was spiritual, it was social. And they would, also, I was going to say medical. They would have TB clinics sometimes at the church because everything was segregated, and so like the white kids would go to maybe the Duncan Memorial Methodist Church, and the Black kids would go to Shiloh Baptist. Both were in Ashland proper. But you might have other places too at different times. But you would go there maybe and get your TB shots or what have you. And so it was just everything. And so and it was social. I read in the newspaper, and they put everything in the newspaper. And so they'd had this a birthday party for the minister of Shiloh, and they list out everything, every gift that he was given. And so, but that was important. People wanted to read, what things were happening at their church and what they were doing. There was one lady I interviewed, Mrs. Gray, who would talk about they would have, because it was their social time, right? And so so you were in church all day on Sunday school, and until then the morning service, and you might leave to eat, and then an afternoon service, and maybe even an evening service, right? And so and she would say a lot of times, because they had to keep the fires going, the men would stay behind, and they would kind of talk and make plans related to the church or the community. And so the church was, again, there, and I know it was a big deal when Shiloh got they added a baptism pool. It was the only indoor baptism pool in the county among the Black churches. And so there's a story where one Sunday, there were 100 people lined up because people came from all churches. And they let all different churches use their baptism pool. Other than that, you were baptized in the river or in the pond. And there's a story in there about Allen Pond that on the east end, this was the east end of the county, and this one of the people that ended up coming to my house, my surprise interviewees, but wonderful. She talked about there was you would sit on, if you've heard of the mourner's bench, if you hadn't accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior, if your parents might be concerned if you were getting up in age, and so you would go during revival and they would make you sit on the mourner's bench. And they might sit on that bench until 12 or 1 o'clock at night trying to get waiting for some young person to get up and finally, go up front and accept Jesus. And so, but this was, this happened in the church in the story she told me, but also there would be like a poem for this is the only place I heard this. This poem or this piece that you would recite, and when you got that, you would leave your house, no matter what time of day or night, walk down the road singing and saying this, and eventually all these, if it was after midnight, people would get up and join you, and they would be singing this song while you were reciting this, and so then you would get baptized, and they got baptized in Allen Pond. And so, and the poem, I can't remember, but she remembered it, and she I have it in the book where she talks about when she had this experience, and so but again, that was being baptized in the pond, as opposed to, and you hear the old deacons would talk about, literally having to use a stick to trouble the water, because there would be snakes, I know. I would have been on that bench forever. But but yeah, that's one of the things. So I don't know how I got on that, but there you go.
Ooh, that's an interesting fact I didn't know about, and I didn't think about snakes and ponds. So
yeah.
Let me clear my mind. As we, again, I want to invite you to start thinking about questions you might have, but I must ask this question. From a historical perspective, you coined a term, the era of disfranchisement. I don't think I've seen that in other places, and you use that in, I don't know if it's a parallel or in place of Jim Crow, when we think about the era of Jim Crow. So can you just talk about that briefly, about the what I think is an interesting breakthrough in historiography, this term era of disfranchisement.
Yeah. But it's not catchy. But for me, Jim Crow has always been a confusing term. People use it differently all the time, and it's so, and it's not clear exactly what you're referring to when it's being used. And so I just wanted to think of, because it's not simply the vote, but I was thinking of disfranchisement in other ways too, in other losing other rights, not just the vote, and to kind of, again, clarify. But I also, one of the things historians do is I kind of threw it out there for debate, to see, because I just feel like, I don't know that Jim Crow, although it's certainly, I still will slip and use it, and it's not like I'm trying to get rid of it. I just want a more defined definition, terminology for that period. And so that's where that comes from.
I think it's a great topic for discussion. Let me open the floor up, and then certainly if you want to talk a little bit more about disfranchisement in Hanover, weaving that in. But we'll open up for questions. Anyone? Okay.
Yes, my name is John Dorman. I noticed in the index of your book there's nothing pertaining to the railroad. And you know, RF&P ran basically straight through Ashland, through the town, and everything branches off of the railroad itself. And actually, Randolph-Macon College, most of our buildings were on the railroad track until they moved it further away. And that particular land belongs to RF&P. Now, I know, which a lot of people don't know, that the RF&P, they started in 1834, and to do slavery and all of that, they used to hire blacks for 1 year from plantation owners, and they would keep them they'd pick them up in January and drop them off back in December. But the railroad people know a lot about everything that goes on in the county, and I think that'll be a good reference for you. And I know this particular library have all of the ledgers from the RF&P. I know that to be a fact myself, from 1834 through probably 1910 or something like that. So there's a lot of good information that you can research in that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. My next project is going to be 1820 to 1860 in Hanover County, so the antebellum years. And so I will definitely be looking at those. And there were some people who I talk a little bit about, because the railroad was there before. And I talk more about it in the dissertation, I think, you know, but your dissertation can be as long as you want it to be. Books, editors limit books pages, so there were things that I wasn't able to include, but that's very true, very true. And thank you for that, reminding me of that source.
You concentrated basically on the Ashland area. For your next information that you're going to provide, are you going to go further past Ashland to other parts of Hanover County? Like, my parents came from what's known now as Mount Pelion, but back then was known as Beaver Dam. And there was a large population of Afro-American people in that area. My mom was an educator. She taught at John M. Gandy. She would have been one of the first teachers to integrate in that time frame. And I was just wondering if you were going to go further across Hanover County to gather stories and other information.
Now, is Bethany Baptist Church?
I came out of Bethany Baptist Church.
That's Mount Pelion, right?
That's
Yeah,
Mount Pelion.
yeah.
That's the oldest black church in Hanover County. My great-great-grandfather was one of the founders.
Okay.
And he helped build the two-room schools that were across the street.
Yeah, there is a story about the Bethany School and what they did to resist after integration was declared that was going to happen. I didn't. My old advisor always said, "Let the sources speak," and unfortunately, I didn't find enough people in other places. I've been told to cover the East End more, so I'll be writing a lot of articles. But the East Side. So that's a point taken, you know.
And my grandparents owned one of the first black-owned, you would call it a convenience store today, but they had the convenience store by day, and on weekends they had the jukebox and the dinners that they served, which put my mom through college. So it's a lot of rich history in that area.
Yeah. Well, anybody in here who has stories, if you're willing to let me interview you, I would love to interview you. Like I said, Hanover's not done, so.
Other questions?
I have a question. Hi, Jody. My name is Sandra.
We've emailed.
We've emailed each other. I'm sorry. My name is Sandra, and yes, we've emailed each other. I want to thank you. You did send my late grandmother, Frances Williams Jackson Jones, a copy of your manuscript, and she was able to receive it. And I read excerpts from her before she passed at 103. And I want to thank you for including this is my cousin Sheila, the story about Walter and Lelia Jackson. Here they are on our shirts, our great-grandparents, and the information about Brown Grove, the interview with my late great-uncle, Reverend Benjamin Jackson from Brown Grove. And I want to thank you because right now I am on a committee and we're trying to memorialize the Brown Grove School that burned down across the road from the church. So we're in the process of doing that. And thank you, because the information that's included in Roses in December will be helpful in providing documentation that we need to memorialize and get the documentation that we need to have the county's plaque. So thank you very much.
That's great. That was a great interview. He was such a nice man. And he told me, he said, I have every report card I ever got. You want to see him?
And he won't let, I tried to laminate them, but he would not.
No, don't do that.
Yeah.
These are great stories. We have time for, I think, one more question.
Ooh, well, I just wanted to thank you for that accurately naming. I'm going to adopt that immediately, the era of disenfranchisement. I really believe that we should call things what they are, just like we should say human trafficking for what was happening here in Richmond, and also call the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands by that full title, because for many years, you know, when it's just shortened to Freedmen's Bureau, not realizing that those refugees were also aided by that program. So I like naming things what they are. Thank you. I'm adopting that immediately.
Okay. Love it, love it. We have one quick question there.
Jody, Brent Tarter over here.
Brent.
I've known you since you were Jody, before you were Dr. Allen, and we've talked
I'm
about
still
your
Jody, Brent.
we've talked about your research many times. I'm curious, what do you think will most surprise or inspire people who have not yet read the book?
Well, hopefully for Hanoverians, the ones that said you won't find anything, hopefully they will be the ones that say, oh, wow, you know, because I feel like, okay, I still like writing on index cards. I have boxes of index cards. And so, which why my right hand is not as good as it used to be. But, so hopefully, I mean, there's just a lot, there's a lot there. I think that, generally, I hope that there's not a lot of county histories beyond, I mean, pretty much the histories of that I found of Hanover are mainly about old plantations and gardens and what have you. And so I'm hoping that more counties will start doing, somebody will start doing these histories, full histories to cover the whole story. And you said, what will surprise them most?
Actually, that was a very good answer.
Oh, okay, thank you, Brent. I will cut it off there.
Well, I hope you enjoy the book as much as I did and have all of your little, you know, maybe you could do the little, what do you call them when you bend the page?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But they tell us not to do that in
I know, and
elementary
that's
school.
why I use these to
Yeah.
make this happen. Well, thank you, everyone. Jody, Dr. Allen, did you have any closing comment you want to make as we wrap up?
I guess one of the things that I noticed as I was rereading is that I hope there's some things in here that you would think I wrote for, as the saying goes, for such a time as this. And I of course, this wasn't happening, but I hope that people can find some encouragement about how you can be challenged with scary, frightening times, but these were people who who didn't have social media, which it might have been better, but didn't have all the technology that we have, but they still fought, they still resisted. And maybe, like I said, that there will be something in here that will be of use today. So.
Well, thank you, and thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
thank you all.
Thank you.